Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing? You can get started in around a minute, but I think most people are already here. All right, let's just get into it. So, hi, my name is Varsha. I'm 16 years old, and a little bit about me. I've been playing sports and dancing for a long time, and I like playing video games and watching shows. But for the past few months, I've been working with BCIs. So, a BCI is a brain-computer interface, which is basically a device that helps your brain and a computer communicate. And there are a bunch of types of BCIs with a bunch of letters like fMRI, MEG, FNIRIS. But today, what we're going to be talking about is an EEG. So an EEG collects electrical signals with electrodes. So an electrode is the thing on your left, and then these electrodes would go on your head and collect the electrical signals. But before we get into what a BCI is, let's get into parts of the brain. So your brain has a bunch of different parts called lobes, and there's 4 main parts. The frontal, and these different parts are useful for different things. The frontal lobe is there for cognitive functions, and it controls like voluntary movement or activity, so like decision making and things like that. Your parietal lobe processes information about temperature, taste, touch, and movement. Your occipital lobe is mainly there for vision, while your temporal lobe is there for looking at memories, integrating them with like your 5 senses, and for hearing. So a lot of you may recognize like this type of picture when you see something about brains or neuroscience. So these different things are called neurons, and they're nerve cells. So a neuron is made out of 3 main things: axons, dendrites, and cell bodies. So this is the axon, these are the dendrites, like the branch thingies, and then there's like a cell, because it is a normal cell. The axon transmits electrical signals. The dendrites gets and puts out these electrical signals, and then the nucleus keeps the cell alive and like does normal cell things. And then around them there are glia cells, which are located around the neurons. So your nerves are really tiny, and they're connected to around 10,000 other nerves. And when they communicate, there are different currents. So an electrical signal is transmitted across the neuron, and then at the end of the neuron, they're converted, at the end of the axon, they're converted into chemical signals, and these chemical signals are released as neurotransmitters. So an example of a neurotransmitter is dopamine. So when you get dopamine, or when it releases, you feel pleasure. So when you get like a notification, dopamine is being released for you to feel good about that notification. But it also does make a lot of problems with things like addiction, which we can talk about a little bit later. But when a current is leaving, there's a positive polarity. When a current is coming in or entering the neuron, there's a negative polarity. And the difference of these polarities can be picked up by the EEG electrodes, and these currents are called primary currents. Now, your brain is constantly generating electrical signals, but for non-invasive BCIs, so like the ones on your skull or like outside of your brain, it's very hard to record individual neurons because your skin and your skull are really good insulators. Now, there's 3 different types of BCIs. There is non-invasive, which is outside of your head. There is semi-invasive, which is on your scalp. It's not inside your brain, but it's kind of just like laying on your brain, but you still need surgery for it, which is why people turn away from it. And then there's fully invasive BCIs. So these fully invasive BCIs are on your brain, like inside your brain, and they can be really good because they pick up the best type of data. It's really accurate, but it can be really bad because when your brain senses a foreign object in your body, it kind of rejects it and kind of puts scar tissue around it, which can cause a bunch of problems like fibrosis and things. But that's why a lot of people stick to non-invasive BCIs, especially those who are making products for like consumers and things like that. Now, when there are a bunch of neurons doing the same thing or transmitting the same activity, the electrodes, non-invasive ones, they can pick that up. But if there's like a small amount or like individual neurons, it's really subtle and hard to pick up. And lots of things like motory things like blinks or like jaw grinding, they're really easily picked up by the electrodes and can kind of come in the way of if you're trying to differentiate like emotions. Because when you blink, it's just it has a really big amplitude. Now, you can single out those blinks and use them to play geometry dash like I did, but you usually take them out when you're trying to work with the data, and that is called pre-processing. But actually getting the data is signal acquisition. Now, what do you do with the data once you get it? There's a lot of different things you can do, but one really big thing that people like is neurofeedback. So neurofeedback kind of comes off of this psychology thing called conditioning. So you may have heard of it, but there's two types of conditioning: classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Now, classical conditioning, we can take the example that's given. There's a dog, and every time you blow a whistle, the person blows a whistle, they give the dog food. And they keep repeating this process until the dog associates the whistle with food. So when they blow the whistle, the dog's mouth gets like watery and it's like hungry and excited for the food. So it's associating an involuntary response with a stimulus. Now, operant conditioning, this is what neurofeedback does. It does something a little bit different. So in this example, the rat is pulling a lever. When there's a green light, food comes out, and when there's a red light, food doesn't come out. But it kind of realizes this after doing it a bunch of times. So it associates the green light with food and the red light with not food. And it associates a voluntary behavior with a consequence. Now, I did this, and you guys can do this too, to stop small like habits and things like that. I started saying yo a lot because of one of my friends, and I kind of didn't want to do that because it was, I don't know. But I ran a little experiment with myself where I started saying yo. Every time I said yo, I would just yell stop, like an embarrassingly loud way, right? And then after I yelled stop, I would just get like embarrassed. So every single time I said yo, I would associate it with like being embarrassed or like just why am I saying no, right? Or stop. So then after 2 days of associating yo with stop, I stopped saying that yo. And it's very accurate, and you guys should try it. You can do it even like with like friends. If you realize that they do something a lot, just say like no or something like that, and eventually they'll stop. It's really good for habit breaking and or just messing around. But a really big thing with neurofeedback is addiction. So when people get addicted to things, it's usually because when they do the thing, dopamine gets released, they feel good, and then they get addicted to that dopamine release. So I talked about this before, but dopamine is a neurotransmitter that makes you feel pleasure. So let's say you get a notification or you do drugs. Don't do drugs. But if you did drugs, the drug would make you release dopamine. And since you like the dopamine or the drug is just addictive on its own, you get addicted to the drug, and it's really hard to stop because when you don't have it, when you have a lack of dopamine, you feel like you need it, and it's a really big problem. But you can kind of solve this with associating the craving of the drug with something else, and that's what neurofeedback does. When it senses that you're craving it, or it could be with anything, it doesn't have to be specifically with drugs, but they do this while handling with addiction. When they see the drug, they kind of do like an audio response or kind of stimulate the dopamine receptors with something else. So when they feel craving for drugs, they would get something else that's also good. Or they would like get like a stop signal with that type of stimulus, and then they would associate the craving with wanting to stop. And that's a way that neurofeedback helps addiction. But what I did is I used neurofeedback to enhance meditation. So meditation is actually really good. I didn't want to do it because my mom was like, you should meditate. And I was like, absolutely not. But it's really good. You guys should try it. It activates something called your parasympathetic nervous system, which makes you really calm. It slows down your heart rate and helps a lot long term with anxiety and stress. So if you do face it, meditation is a really good solution to those things. But the way I did this was when it sensed that you were meditating well, it would give you an audio, it would play a sound that was, it would play one specific sound that was good. And then when you weren't meditating as well, it would play a different sound. And once you play the sound once you associate meditating good with that sound, once you play that sound a little bit more, you can meditate a little bit better, if that makes sense. But the way I track that they were meditating is from the different types of brainwaves. So this is how the EEG data looks. Obviously, there are, if you look at the raw data, it's numbers, but the numbers represent the frequency or like the amplitude. So the frequency is how many times in a second there's a line or there's a specific brain activity, but the amplitude is how high it goes. So when the frequency is higher, you use your brain more, but when the frequency is lower, you use your brain less. So that's why gamma, the highest frequency, is there for insight and expanded consciousness, while delta is just sleep. So meditation falls between alpha and then low beta. And when I sensed it between a specific amount of frequencies, I would play the good sound. If not, I would play the bad sound. And eventually it would associate and play the good sound. So right now I'm making an anger management app with neurofeedback. It would help the person find out when they're angry with BCIs, as well as a heart rate monitor and an accelerometer, which senses motion. So if their heart rate was really up, it was sensing anger, and they weren't moving around. And that's why another reason why your heart rate would go up, right? Like if you're exercising, it didn't want to do anything wrong. So the accelerometer would be there for motion. But yeah, it would sense when you were angry, and when you're leading up to being really angry, it would find the triggers, and then it would use neurofeedback in a specific way, or it would help you find the triggers because a lot of people don't know their triggers, and you would kind of see how you were feeling throughout the day, when you were feeling worse than, and then it would be able to log it. So there are a bunch of BCI companies out there like Neurolink, OpenBCI, Neurable, and Muse. So Neurolink, it is Elon Musk's company, and he has tiny little BCIs. They're semi-invasive BCIs, so if you remember what I said, they are placed on the scalp, but not in your scalp. And it's really cool because they have a machine do it in like 6 seconds. It's like a tiny hole, and they just put it in. It's really easy. But that is, it's really low stages, so we don't really know what they're going to do with it yet. With OpenBCI, it's kind of like the Arduino of the BCI world. It gives people access to BCIs, It would give people boards, the electrodes, and that's where I got my BCI from. The BCIs that I showed you before, they were from Open BCI. And then Neurable and Muse, they're more consumer products. So Neurable has really good headphones, and they have electrodes in like the headphone area, so for the temporal lobe, and they help you with focus. And this really, I don't know, I thought this was a really cool feature. Basically, it would tell you how much each song in your playlist would make you focus, and then it would also have how well you were focusing throughout your study session or your work session. And then if you're feeling burnt out, it would tell you to stop. A lot of cool features. And then Muse does a lot of neurofeedback with meditation, sleep, and a lot of like throughout your day type of things. Now, how can you guys get started? You guys can buy a BCI, but these can be a little bit expensive. So if you want to kind of play around with BCIs, you can go on EEG Lab, which is like a BCI stimulation, or look at public data sets. So I'm going to put a few in the chat, but this is where you can search for data sets, like EEG data sets, and kind of just like play around with them. They're really cool. Like you'll get like a lot of different data sets. You can use AI to work with them, but you would need to know things like Python or like MATLAB or a specific language to work with them. For the pre-processing, you can use Python MNE. But if you want more details on how you can get started, DM me on Discord or Instagram like I showed before, or like just ask in the chat. But yeah, now it's time for some discussion questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So our discussion questions today are going to be on the ethics of BCIs. So they're going to be mainly focused on Elon Musk's company, Neurolink, because a lot of the other companies are actually just non-invasive BCIs, but just BCIs in general. So the first one is Elon Musk has his company Neuralink, and they want to use their BCIs on everyone. But this could be really bad because they want to use it on a lot of people and get their data to make their algorithms and everything a little bit better, because more data makes everything better all the time. But this could be used for bad reasons if people like hacked in or like they sold their data. So do you think getting everyone's data is a good thing or a bad thing? You can also type in the chat if you're not comfortable with speaking out loud. But I can start. So data is being collected everywhere. So if they did do it very privately and very safely, I think it could be a good thing. But if sold to other things like marketing, which we'll get into later, it could be a pretty bad thing. But yeah, I want to hear your opinions.
I'd add that you make a good point, but what are the chances that they won't sell it to companies for marketing data? Especially since companies like Google and other companies like already collect a bunch of data just from our internet browsing and stuff. So
I can't really say what the chances are because we never know, but I'd say I think the chances would be high looking at like how data is used today. Lots of companies like Facebook and like you said, Google use our data without us really like saying anything, just by us using it. That's our like consent to it. But yeah, I think with Google and things like that, I think it is a good thing. With BCIs, I think it would be a good thing with making the things better. But if it does get advanced enough, BCIs can be like, oh, we know what you're thinking. Right now, it is already like, we know how you're feeling. So, anyone have any thoughts on that?
I don't think BCIs should exist. I feel like they should be taboo. Like the whole idea of BCIs, it implies that you will be looking inside brain waves and even if it's as simple as brain waves, eventually, like, it will help us understand the brain mechanisms, and we will see emotions and the way people think. And like, though it may enhance like mental and physical abilities, it would, like, if you know how people's brain waves work or whatnot, it could still manipulate other people's opinions and ideas. So, mind over matter, you know?
I mean, I think the medical things are very helpful. Like being able to use neurofeedback to make yourself feel better, or like I had this idea before where it was like, um, it would be using BCIs to see how you're feeling, and then it would like play like music depending on your mood, or like lots of things like that. They could be really cool because you wouldn't have to think to do a specific thing, right? Um, Obviously, there are a lot of bad things, but do you think like the good things outweigh the bad things? Because like there's a lot of good things.
Yeah, I think Varsha makes a good point, and it's not just with BCIs. Like I think the same thing applies to almost every technology that we talk about nowadays. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's like something to consider all the time. I think ruling out something just because of its cons without considering its pros is also not the best way to approach it.
Does anyone else have any?
I'd be in favor of collecting data through BCI if there was if the people who were donating the information were completely anonymous, and then I would say you would need like a third party involved that would be ensuring that no other no commercial interest could get a hold of this material. To me, I used to work in genetics, and I think it's valuable to get the DNA from a lot of individuals so that we can know more about the genomes of different people. On the other hand, I don't think those people should be identified, because unscrupulous insurance companies could say, oh, that person has a predilection to addiction, so we're not going to insure that person. So as long as it can be guaranteed that the information is anonymous, I think it'd be really valuable.
Yeah. Another thing that could be bad with BCIs is kind of like the marketing aspect. I think David kind of touched on that. But in marketing, BCIs can be used very badly. With data today, like when you're talking about something, next a little bit later you might see it on like Instagram or like Facebook, or if you're like or like ads on like Google and things like that. If they understand how you're feeling, they might use that to your advantage to sell you something, which could be a whole other thing. But how do you guys feel on that? Because do you like that people can like sell you things that you want? Because you might be more interested in like the ads you get more than like just random ads, right?
I mean, it would depend on the ads itself, because like sometimes ads, they show the things you want, but then when you buy it, because they convince you to buy it, it's not what you thought it would be, and then you just have trashy stuff.
Mm-hmm. They could use your advantage, I agree. But like, let's say it was just a quality item that they're trying to sell you because they know you would like it.
But the thing is, how would you know it was a quality item?
I'm just making a hypothetical. Let's just say it is.
Well, in that perspective, then it would be good, but we don't know for sure how people will use our info.
Mm-hmm. I think Maria had a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's cool if like people were able to like know. It's kind of concerning that people know what you want, but then if it could be used for good, like, then yeah, it would be pretty cool. But it's concerning how like people do know what you want, because I mean, most people value their privacy, and it's kind of, yeah, concerning.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
Well, I won't lie, I've definitely used those ads a lot, but I also think it forces you or like encourages you to spend a lot more money than you typically would.
Okay.
I agree with Maria, and I find that it's actually concerning that they can like find out what you're thinking, but it's also very interesting because you also are more likely to use those products. So there's kind of two sides of a coin.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Okay. Last question before you guys can ask me some. Would you get a BCI, like the Neurolink BCI in your head?
No. I'd probably get non-invasive if I were to get.
Mm-hmm.
I would get it in a heartbeat. I can't wait.
Same. Okay. Anyone else?
I would not get it because I like privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wouldn't get it either, and if I were to, I would get non-invasive.
Okay.
If I were to get it, I'd wait for like a couple years to see like what other people think about it, and I wouldn't get it right away. And like you don't know what can happen, basically. But yeah, most likely no.
Okay. Think a few people. Okay, yeah, no one said anything in the chat, but you can write it in the your opinion in the chat. But for those who said privacy, you guys, I'm sure you guys use Chrome, right? If not, you guys use Google. They kind of steal all of your data all the time, but since you have a lot of the benefits, you still use it. So why is that different with BCIs?
Your opinions and your ideas are in your head. That's something that will go away with BCIs.
Mm-hmm. But we're definitely not advanced enough for that yet.
But we will be, like, eventually.
Yeah, once to figure out anything in their head, like our bank has basically anything.
That's true. Okay.
Back with the marketing, what if the stores changed your opinion of their products and made you buy it?
How will they do that with neurostimulation?
I don't know. Yeah, with BCIs, you were saying how like you could do something with the gamma rays and whatnot, and you could tell what people think when they see a certain product. What if you could, with BCIs, change how people think?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Ooh, I hadn't thought about that. I mean, if you do get like intrigued by a product, they probably will see you like as a person who will probably buy it more and maybe like advertise it to you more until you like cave in. So that could be something.
We hope.
Okay. I think that's all the time we have for discussion questions. Thanks for being so active in that, guys. I agree with Anne in the chat. If you were anonymous, I think a lot of the problems would be solved. But any questions for me? I think that's the end of this workshop then.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Problem. I'm going to put my email in the chat just in case you do want to reach out to me. I'm always open to it. But yeah, hope you guys have a good rest of the war.
Thank you, Varsha, for coming and attending our workshop, and we really enjoyed it. It was pretty cool. Guys, once you exited the workshop call, please head back to the live stream. We'll do closing ceremonies and then wrap up for the day.
Bye guys, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.